It was on an ordinary Thursday morning, over breakfast in a dining hall large enough to host a wedding, that his father gave him the news that would change absolutely everything. Gerald Ashworth did not look up from his newspaper as his son took a seat at the long marble table. He simply said that there was a matter that needed handling, personally, and that it concerned a small village called Umuji, the very village where Daniel's grandfather had been born, decades before the Ashworth name meant anything to anyone. Daniel assumed, at first, that this was nothing more than a formality. His father's company was building a new agricultural processing plant on land near the village, and the local elders, it seemed, had been resisting the deal for months. Negotiations had stalled completely, and so his father wanted someone who carried the family name, not simply an employee with a briefcase, to travel there and settle the matter face to face. Daniel resisted at first. He reminded his father that he had a gala to attend that very evening, that he hadn't set foot outside the city in years, that surely someone else could handle something this small. But Gerald Ashworth was not a man who accepted no easily, from his son or from anyone else. He told Daniel, quite plainly, that it was time he remembered where the family's roots truly were, not simply where its bank accounts sat. And so, the following morning, Daniel packed a bag of clothes entirely unsuited for village life, climbed into the back of his car, and set off toward a place he barely remembered. A place that held nothing for him but heat, dust, and the faint, distant memory of his grandmother's cooking. He told his driver, a loyal and quietly amused man named Tund, that this would be a short trip, 3 days in and out, sign the papers and go home. Tund, who had worked for the Ashworth family for over a decade, simply smiled and said nothing. He had learned, over the years, that village life had its own particular way of rearranging a man's calendar, whether that man liked it or not. The drive itself told its own story. City streets gave way to open countryside, and eventually, the smooth paved road gave way entirely to red dirt, winding beneath a canopy of trees that seemed to swallow the car whole. Daniel, who had spent the entire journey scrolling through emails on his phone, finally looked up and found himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, genuinely curious about where he was going. He had no idea, of course, that within those next 3 days, 3 days that would eventually stretch into something far longer, an entirely new rhythm was waiting to reshape the rest of his life. The village market of Umuji was, in every way, the opposite of the world Daniel had left behind. Where the city was quiet, sleek, and carefully controlled, the market was loud, vibrant, and utterly alive. Women called out prices over baskets overflowing with tomatoes, peppers, yams, and fresh green okra. Children darted between stalls, laughing. The air smelled of earth, spice, and wood smoke. At the center of it all sat a young woman named Amara, 23 years old, sharp-tongued and quick-handed, wrapping vegetables for a customer while laughing easily at some private joke between them. Beside her, her younger sister Ifeoma arranged peppers into careful little piles, glancing occasionally at a sleek black car that had been circling the village square all morning. City people, she told her sister. Amara, without even looking up, said she didn't much care who they were, as long as they didn't touch her okra without paying for it. It was, perhaps, the most ordinary morning of her life, right up until the moment it wasn't. The black car finally stopped nearby, and out stepped Daniel Ashworth. Fitted shirt, sunglasses, entirely out of place among the dust and noise of the market. He was holding his phone up, searching hopelessly for a signal that would never come, distracted, walking without watching where his feet were taking him. He was looking, at that moment, for the village council office. What he found instead was Amara's market stall, and he found it by walking directly into it, sending an entire basket of freshly picked okra tumbling into the red dirt at his feet. Amara's reaction was immediate and entirely without mercy. She demanded to know if his eyes were simply for decoration, since they clearly weren't being used for their intended purpose. Daniel, startled, began to apologize, but Amara cut him off before he could finish, informing him, quite sharply, that he had made the mess, and that he would be the one picking it up. This, she told him firmly, was not the city, where a man could throw money at every problem he caused and simply walk away smiling. Daniel stood there for a long moment, utterly stunned. No investor had ever spoken to him this way. No rival executive, no board member. Not even his father's harshest critics dared to address him with such blunt, unbothered honesty. And yet, almost against his own will, he found himself crouching down in the dirt, picking up scattered okra pods one by one, dusting them off, and handing them back to a woman who could not have cared less that his family's name was on half the buildings in the city he'd come from. When he finally stood, he told her, half laughing, genuinely amused despite himself, that she was rather feisty for someone who sold okra for a living. Amara, taking the recovered basket without missing a beat, replied that he was rather careless for someone wearing shoes that likely cost more than everything in the market combined. And then she turned and walked away, without another word, leaving Daniel standing there in the dirt with a slow, confused smile spreading across his face. A smile he hadn't worn in longer than he cared to admit. No one, in Daniel Ashworth's entire adult life, had ever spoken to him quite like that. And though he wouldn't understand it fully for weeks to come, some quiet part of him had already decided he wanted to hear it again. Later that same day, dusting the last of the red dirt from his trousers, Daniel found the village's respected elder, Chief Ease, seated beneath a large mango tree outside the council office, surrounded by a handful of fellow elders. The chief greeted him warmly, telling him that his grandfather would be proud to see an Ashworth standing on this soil once again. Daniel, still eager to settle matters quickly, explained that he had come regarding the processing plant, and that his father wished the matter resolved without delay. Chief Ease only laughed gently at this. Quickly, he said, was a very city word. Here, in Umuji, matters that would affect generations were never rushed. First, Daniel would eat with them. Only after that would business be discussed at all. And then came the news that truly unsettled him. The full village council, the chief explained, would not convene until the new moon. Daniel would be staying far longer than the 3 days he had planned for. Daniel forced a polite smile, though his jaw tightened with quiet frustration. But as he turned to walk away, his eyes drifted, almost without his permission, back toward the market, back toward the woman who had just put him so thoroughly and so satisfyingly in his place. He had come to Umuji expecting a quick signature and an even quicker return to his comfortable life. Instead, the village had just handed him something far more inconvenient and far more valuable: time. That evening, as golden light spread low across the village, Daniel found himself walking alone, restlessly checking his phone for a signal that simply refused to arrive. It was then that he passed Amara once more, heading home with an empty basket balanced against her hip. He called out to her, "Okra girl," he said, only half teasing. She replied, without slowing down, that she did in fact have a name. He told her he'd like to hear it properly this time, not while apologizing on his knees. And so, with a small, reluctant smile, she told him, Amara. He offered his own name in return, Daniel, though she informed him she already knew exactly who he was. Everyone in Umuji recognized the Ashworth car the moment it rolled through the village square. He admitted, quietly, that she likely knew more about him already than most people in the city ever bothered to learn. There was a pause between them then, a beat of unexpected honesty neither of them had planned for, and it was Amara who finally broke the silence, asking him, with genuine curiosity, why a billionaire's son looked so tired. Daniel laughed softly at that, caught entirely off guard. He told her it might be the very first time in years that someone had asked him a question, instead of asking him for something. In that single, simple question, something shifted quietly in Daniel's chest. The strange, unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen. Not for his wealth, not for his family name, simply as a tired man, searching for something he couldn't quite put into words. That night, back at her family's modest compound, Amara's sister Ifeoma teased her mercilessly about being seen walking with the Ashworth boy, village gossip. She reminded her sister, traveled faster than the evening wind. She warned Amara, half joking and half serious, that men like that came to villages looking for adventure, and forgot the women in them the moment their cars turned back toward the city. Amara insisted, quite firmly, that she had no interest in him whatsoever, that her okra business, and her family, needed her far more than any city man ever could. But even as those words left her mouth, something quiet, unfamiliar, and entirely unwelcome had already begun stirring in her chest. A feeling she wasn't ready to name, and wasn't at all sure she wanted to. Meanwhile, in the small guest house where Daniel now stayed, his driver Tund found him lying on his bed, smiling at absolutely nothing, lost in thought. Tund teased him gently about it, and Daniel, surprising even himself, admitted that there was a woman in the village who sold okra in the market, and who did not care one bit who his father was. Tund grinned at that, telling him that the city had finally met something it couldn't simply buy. And when Daniel tried to wave the comment away, Tund pointed out quite plainly that Patricia, the woman waiting for him back home, would never in 100 years spill vegetables on herself just to make a point about respect. Daniel said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, staring into the flame of a lantern lighting the room since the electricity had gone out for the night, he admitted that no, she wouldn't. He had arrived in Umuji thinking only of numbers, signatures, and how quickly he could return home. But lying there that night, in a house without electricity, in a village he barely remembered, Daniel Ashworth realized, for the first time in longer than he could recall, that he was in absolutely no hurry to leave. When we left Daniel Ashworth, he had just discovered something no amount of money had ever given him. Genuine curiosity about another person's life. A week had now passed since he'd first stumbled, quite literally, into Amara's market stall. And in that week, something quiet and undeniable had begun growing between them. Daniel had taken to visiting the market almost daily, under the thin excuse of understanding the local economy, before his negotiations with the village council. In truth, he simply wanted to be near her. He'd taken, rather clumsily, to helping her arrange her baskets each morning. An effort that consistently ended in Amara sighing and reminding him, yet again, that the heavy side of a basket always went down, not up. Daniel would laugh at his own uselessness, and Amara, despite herself, had begun laughing more easily around him too. It was during one of these mornings that a local mechanic named Chuka approached the stall, wiping grease from his hands, eyeing Daniel with open and unmistakable suspicion. Chuka asked Amara, rather pointedly, whether the city man was bothering her. Amara waved him off gently, insisting Daniel was harmless. Mostly useless with baskets, but harmless all the same. Chuka, before walking away, turned to Daniel and reminded him, quite plainly, that some people had been waiting for Amara long before his car ever rolled into the village square. Daniel said nothing in response, though the tension between the two men was impossible to miss. Amara, sighing, explained that Chuka had appointed himself her personal guardian since they were both children. What neither of them said aloud, though the narrator will tell you now, was that Chuka had loved Amara quietly for years, patiently waiting for the right season to finally speak his heart. And Daniel's sudden, unexpected arrival threatened to end that long wait before it had ever truly begun. Meanwhile, inside the village council office, Daniel sat across from Chief Ease and a table of elders, village land maps spread out before them. The chief explained, with quiet gravity, that the land Daniel's father wanted for his processing plant was the very land 3 villages depended on for food: their farms, their okra, their vegetables, their children's next meal. Daniel, for the first time in the entire negotiation, found himself genuinely troubled. He admitted that he hadn't fully understood what that land meant until he'd stood on it himself. That he had come here thinking only in numbers on a page, and was only now beginning to see the people and the futures standing behind every one of those numbers. Chief Ease studied him carefully at this, and told him that his grandfather had once said almost the very same words, before building the very first road into the village, a road that had helped its people rather than harmed them. Perhaps, the chief suggested, Daniel carried more of his grandfather inside him than he yet realized. Daniel, quietly resolved, told the council he wanted to find a way that helped his father's company and the village together, not one at the expense of the other. He asked only for a little more time to make that happen. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel wasn't thinking about deadlines, quarterly reports, or shareholder returns. He was thinking about Amara's home, her family, her sister, and what it would truly mean to take any of it from her. Back in the city, his father Gerald was growing impatient. A tense phone call between them made that painfully clear. 3 weeks, Gerald reminded his son, and still no signed deal. He wanted to know exactly what was keeping Daniel there so long. Daniel explained that the situation was more complicated than they'd realized, that the land the company wanted was the very land the village depended on to survive, and that a different arrangement, a genuine partnership rather than a takeover, was needed instead. Gerald's patience thinned further. He asked sharply whether this sudden concern for village farmland had anything to do with a girl Patricia had mentioned, one who sold vegetables on the roadside. Daniel insisted this had nothing to do with her. But his father wasn't interested in excuses. Patricia, he informed his son, was flying in that very weekend to bring him home for their engagement announcement. And Daniel was warned, in no uncertain terms, not to embarrass the family. The call ended abruptly. Daniel stood outside the guest house for a long moment afterward, phone in hand, caught painfully between two entirely different worlds. The one waiting for him back home, and the one that had quietly begun to feel, for the first time in years, like it might actually be home instead. That evening, Daniel found Amara sitting alone by the riverbank, her feet dangling near the water's edge as the light faded gently around her. He asked if he could sit. She shrugged, telling him it was a free river after all. They sat together in a long, comfortable silence before Daniel finally spoke, telling her that his father wanted him back in the city, that there was someone his father wished for him to marry. Amara kept her voice carefully neutral, though her hands tightened slightly at her sides. She told him that was his world, after all, that she had always known he would return to it eventually. Villages, she said quietly, were for visiting, not for staying. Daniel turned to face her then, entirely sincere. He told her these past few weeks had meant more to him than years spent in that other world ever had, and that he didn't want to simply walk away. Not from this, not from her. Amara, guarding herself carefully, asked what exactly he expected her to do. Wait by her okra stall while he decided between her and a woman his father had already approved of. Daniel answered quietly. He told her he only wanted her to be honest with him, to tell him plainly if what he felt was entirely one-sided, so that he could stop hoping for something that was never going to happen. Amara looked away and said nothing at all. And in that heavy, unspoken silence, both of them already knew the truth sitting quietly between them, as certain and as silent as the river running beside them in the dark. 2 days later, a sleek car pulled into the village in a cloud of red dust, and out stepped Patricia Odom. Designer clothing, sunglasses pushed up onto her head, utterly unimpressed by everything around her. She informed Daniel, the moment she saw him, that his father had sent her personally to bring him back to his senses, that troubling rumors had reached the city, rumors about a village girl. Daniel, careful but firm, told her the woman's name was Amara, and that she was not some rumor to be dismissed. She was a person who deserved basic respect. Patricia only laughed coldly at this, reminding him that respect wasn't a business asset. Image was, and a man like him marrying a woman who sold okra by the roadside was simply not the image his father had spent 30 years building an empire around. Patricia had not traveled all that distance for love. She had come, quite plainly, to protect an arrangement, one that had nothing whatsoever to do with Daniel's heart, and everything to do with appearances. Driven by curiosity, and no small amount of spite, Patricia later wandered into the market and found Amara's stall herself. She picked up a pot of okra with obvious disinterest, dropping it carelessly, and told Amara, quite cruelly, that she was the one who'd had Patricia's fiancé running around in the dirt like a common farmhand. Amara, steady and refusing to be rattled, replied simply that she had never asked him to come there. He had come entirely on his own. Patricia leaned in then, her voice low and sharp, and told Amara that she would save her the heartbreak, since clearly no one else was willing to. Men like Daniel, she said, enjoyed their little village adventures. They did not marry them. When all of this was over, Patricia told her, Amara would still be there, selling okra by the roadside, while Daniel returned home to marry someone who actually matched his world. And with that, Patricia turned and walked away, without waiting for any response at all. Amara stood frozen for a moment, hurt flickering briefly across her face before she forced it back down, hardening her expression once more.